In 2003, Lego had exactly 12 months to live. The most beloved toy company on the planet, the brand that defined childhood for generations, wasn't just struggling, it was effectively a corpse. The banks had stopped calling back. The executives were literally packing their offices into cardboard boxes. Inside the headquarters in Billund, Denmark, the atmosphere was described by employees as a burning platform. You could see the flames, you could smell the smoke, and there was nowhere left to run. But what happened next wasn't just a lucky break or a seasonal spike in sales. It was quite possibly the greatest turnaround in corporate history. This is the story of how Lego saved itself by almost destroying everything it had built, proving that sometimes to survive, you have to burn the empire down to the ground. Chapter 1. The Empire That Forgot Itself. To understand the magnitude of the 2003 collapse, we have to look at the foundation. This story begins in 1932, in the middle of the Great Depression. Ole Kirk Christensen was a master carpenter who had just lost everything. His shop had closed, his wife had passed away, and he was left to raise 4 sons in a world that didn't have money for high-end furniture. Out of sheer desperation, Ole started carving small wooden toys from the scraps of his workshop. He named this fledgling business Lego, a contraction of the Danish phrase "leg godt," which translates to play well. Ironically, he didn't know at the time that in Latin, Lego also means I put together. But the road was never easy. Tragedy struck when his factory burned to the ground. Most people would have taken that as a sign from the universe to quit. But Ole was possessed by a standard of quality that bordered on obsession. His motto, carved into a sign that hung in his shop, was, "De bedste ikke forgot," only the best is good enough. By the 1960s, Ole's son, Godfred, took the reins and made a bet that would change history. He moved away from wood and leaned into a new, unproven material, plastic. He patented the interlocking tube system we know today. At the time, parents hated it. They thought plastic looked cheap and fragile compared to sturdy wood. But Godfred saw something they didn't, a system of play where every piece, regardless of the set, could fit with any other piece. By the 1980s, Lego was essentially printing money. They were in every country, on every Christmas list, and in every playroom. They had Lego Space, Lego Castle, and the intricate Technic line. Revenue was exploding year after year. They were untouchable. They were the kings of the toy chest. And that's exactly when they made their first and most fatal mistake. Chapter 2. The Great Panic. The 1990s arrived like a freight train, and it brought a digital revolution. Suddenly, kids didn't want to sit on the carpet for 3 hours building a police station. They wanted the Sony PlayStation. They wanted Nintendo 64. They wanted the fast-paced instant gratification of 64-bit graphics. Lego's leadership looked at the data and panicked. They suffered from what psychologists call status quo bias, the fear that their core product was becoming obsolete. Instead of leaning into what made them unique, they tried to be everything to everyone. They decided that if they couldn't beat the screen, they would put the Lego logo on everything else. Between 1997 and 2002, the company went into a frantic expansion. They launched Lego clothes, Lego watches, and Lego jewelry. They started building massive, expensive theme parks in California and Germany, dumping hundreds of millions of dollars into physical resorts thinking they could out-Disney Disney. But the real rot was happening in the design room. In a desperate attempt to stay fresh, they increased the number of unique brick types from 6,000 to over 12,000. This sounds like innovation, but it was a logistical nightmare. Every new specialized brick, like a unique cockpit or a specific limb, required a new, incredibly expensive injection mold. Some of these molds cost tens of thousands of dollars to produce. Costs were skyrocketing while the system of play was being diluted. Lego had become a company that was incredibly busy, but completely lost. Chapter 3. 12 Months to Live. By the time 2003 rolled around, the chickens came home to roost. The numbers were catastrophic. Sales had plummeted by 26% in a single year. The company reported a $300 million loss, and they were drowning in over $800 million of debt. For the first time in 70 years, the Christensen family, the owners, began looking for buyers. They were ready to sell the family jewel just to keep it from going bankrupt. But there was a problem. Nobody wanted to buy a burning building. Inside the company, it was total chaos. Designers had zero direction. Every department was acting as its own fiefdom, launching products without checking if they were actually profitable. One executive later admitted, "We were making toys that nobody wanted." The strangest part of the 2003 crisis was that Lego wasn't dying because of the competition. They weren't dying because of video games or the internet. They were dying from internal confusion. They had forgotten what a Lego brick was actually for. They were trying to be a lifestyle brand, a theme park operator, and a video game developer, all while forgetting how to be a toy company. Chapter 4. The Consultant and the Audit. In a final desperate move, the board did something radical. They bypassed the old guard and hired a 35-year-old former McKinsey consultant named Jürgen Vig Knudstorp. To the traditionalists in Denmark, Jürgen was an outsider who didn't understand the magic of the brick. But Jürgen understood something much more important: math. In his very first meeting, Jürgen didn't offer platitudes. He told the board, "We are on a burning platform, and we need to stop pretending that we're not." He launched a full-scale audit of every single product Lego made. The results were brutal. He discovered that 94% of all the new products Lego had released in the last 5 years were losing money. The theme parks were bleeding cash. The licensing deals were uncontrolled disasters where Lego was taking all the risk and seeing none of the reward. Jürgen's fix was a masterclass in corporate surgery. He did the unthinkable. He sold a 70% stake in the Legoland theme parks to a specialist operator. He slashed the number of unique brick types back down from 12,000 to 6,000, forcing designers to be creative with what they already had. He fired expensive executives and moved production to cheaper partners in Eastern Europe and Mexico. But here's the genius part. He didn't just cut costs, he changed the strategy. He realized that Lego shouldn't be afraid of big franchises. They should weaponize them. Instead of generic toys, they went all in on Star Wars and Harry Potter. These weren't just toys, they were cultural events. Licensing went from a money pit to the company's main profit engine. Chapter 5. The Secret Weapon. As the company regained its footing, Jürgen saw something that everyone else had ignored: the adults. For decades, Lego was seen as a toy for kids aged 5 to 12. But a massive community of A-Fools, adult fans of Lego, had been building incredible things in the shadows. These people weren't just hobbyists, they were professionals with high disposable incomes. Lego leaned in hard. They launched the Architecture series, selling sophisticated sets of the London skyline, the Eiffel Tower, and Dubai. They released the Ultimate Collector series, including an $800 Millennium Falcon that was more of a piece of art than a toy. They realized that while kids have the imagination, adults have the money. Then came 2014, the year Lego completed its cultural conquest. Warner Brothers released the Lego Movie. It cost $60 million to make, a drop in the bucket for a major studio, and it pulled in over $469 million at the box office. But the box office wasn't the point. The movie was a 100-minute commercial that people paid to watch. In the 2 years following the movie, Lego sales grew by 25% year over year. The movie wasn't just selling Lego, the movie was Lego. Chapter 6. The Empire Strikes Back. Today, the burning platform of 2003 is a distant memory. Lego is the #1 toy company on Earth, generating over $9 billion in annual revenue. They have multiple hit movies, a massive video game presence, and a secondary resale market where rare sets are more valuable than gold or Bitcoin. Lego didn't just survive, they became a cultural empire that transcends age, language, and geography. But the lesson isn't about cost-cutting or licensing deals. Lego almost died because they forgot why people cared. They thought the magic was in the watches, the clothes, or the theme parks. They were wrong. The magic was always in the brick. It was in the simple, tactile power of being able to build anything you can imagine. Sometimes the key to a massive success isn't expanding your horizons. It's remembering who you are at your core. If you enjoyed this deep dive into how a giant nearly crumbled, make sure to subscribe, because the next story we have lined up is even more unbelievable. And if there's a company or a collapse you want me to cover next, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.